All right. So this is the August 15th version of the SATP working group. I am Wes Hardiger, the chair. Claire can't make it today, so I'm in charge. Sorry about that. I will attempt to take notes along the way, but if anybody wants to help, the note-taking tool is always appreciated. These are sort of generic slides that everybody should already know, but just to remind everybody, the IETF interim meetings are covered by the note well. So hopefully you and your appropriate lawyer should understand it appropriately as to what it means to participate in the IETF and how your contributions are taken as contributions for the public good. We have lots of information. Everybody knows all of this. I still need to fix that list of drafts. Those still aren't the official IETF ones. Sorry about that. And everybody knows our scope. So with that, the agenda for today, as you know, is a fairly generic one that we use for the interim meetings. And I will actually stop my presentation if I remember how. I do this all the time. You would think that I would remember where the stop present. There it goes. So the first up on the agenda is really just introductions, which we just did. And the second thing on the agenda is really diving into where the documents are and any problems that people want to talk about. Thomas has some slides to share. Thomas, I did not actually see, are your slides relevant to the discussion later that you wanted to do, or were they relevant to nowish where you wanted to talk about the protocol?
Sorry, my bad. It's both. So the first part is talking about the architecture updates, including comments from Yaron, and then the second part is the numbering thing.
All right, why don't we go ahead and start with you? You should be able to share your presentation. It is loaded, so you should be able to click,
Okay, so
share preloaded slides is what you want.
It's never worked for me, so let me. How do I actually?
The second, it's the button to the right of the hand on the upper left. It looks like a file with a slash through it.
Oh, there you go.
Because you're not sharing, and then I have to click yes, and then
yes. So choose a deck to be. Do I just drag there or like?
Yeah, I think you just click on one.
Okay, it just says there's no decks to be shared, no slides available.
Oh, maybe it didn't. Let me try. I just uploaded it, and sometimes it doesn't work right away, unfortunately. So you might have to share your screen, or I can do it too. But uh-oh, Thomas, you went offline. We will give him a minute to come back. In the meantime, does anybody else have? There's Thomas actually back again. While we're waiting for Thomas, you can go ahead and share your screen. I think it's probably the way around that at this point.
Try sharing my screen this time because I've got. Okay. Yes. Select window or screen. Okay, let me just do guest reader. Can you guys see that? Can you guys see anything?
Not yet, but give it a second. Sometimes it takes a second.
So I chose PDF.
So if you're sharing your screen.
Okay, actually, you know what? Let me try again.
In the meantime, is there other topics that other people want to talk about today? Yeah.
Okay, so are we good? Okay, yes. So let me flip. You guys see that? SATP updates.
No, we see your
again. Okay.
We see your Meet Echo window.
Wes, I need a favor. Can you just
no problem.
Share the PDF? Thank you. Sorry about that, folks.
No problem. In the meantime, however, is there other people that want to discuss other topics today besides the ones that updates? So does anybody want to discuss the use cases updates or anything else? All right, so I think that leaves, Rama?
About use cases, we had two new proposals for use cases. One by Chunchi, who's on the call today, and another by Victor, who created a draft. So there's a brief offline discussion happening, and we'll soon take it to the main list and then propose draft updates. So that's a very quick
Okay.
update on use cases.
Yeah. I saw those, and it looks like they're interesting things to talk about. So if you want some time today, we can certainly do that after Thomas goes through his update slides. I'll leave that to you if you think that there's content today, or if it should just be resolved on the mailing list at this point.
No content today, but maybe in the next
Okay.
interim meeting.
Okay, great. All right, Thomas. So back to you.
Okay, thank you. So there's two parts to these slides, folks. My apologies. The first part is just quick updates on the architecture and the issues that Yaron had brought up on the GitHub. Next slide, please, Wes. So now architectures, I think, in lockstep with SATP core. So particularly the flows. There might be some words that are not exactly identical, but I think they're pretty much identical. Stage one requires some specific parameters. So, for example, things that do exist already. So, for example, if it's originator identity and so on, and gateway owner identity, there are solutions out there such as X509 certificates, verified credentials, and so on, which is out of scope for us, but is there. And in fact, it's probably not in scope for SATP. However, there are some things that constructs that do not yet exist, which is this one of them being asset network identification identifier. And I think over the past 2 years, we've talked about this many times. And so this is the second half of the slides, and it's good. I see Wejia is participating because this is kind of pretty much his baby. So I'm only happy to help. And the reason is because number one, gateways will need to identify to other external entities, which network do I serve, and it's possible that a gateway may in fact simultaneously be serving two separate, even unrelated networks. Okay, I know I'm pushing this, but just that's probably an extreme case. The more realistic one, and I'm thinking of DLT systems, whatever it is, Cosmos, Polkadot, and so on, which internally have actual distinct subnetworks. Using our phrase, they call it. I can't remember what they call it, but so when you're from the outside, you have to say, well, which one are you actually wanting to talk to? Which subnet, right? And it's akin to maybe an IP routing using masks and so on. And in this sense, using the IP routing example, it's like the gateway is a NAT box, and so this is like if you guys know what the NAT traversal problem is, so that's why we need identifiers, but we'll talk about it later on. Question, is it hands up? Is it question?
Yeah, Rama, you're first.
Yeah, thanks. Quick on the last point. By subnetworks, you're talking about an internet subnet, right? Not about necessarily a subledger.
I'm talking about a network having multiple ledgers, DLTs.
Okay.
So an organization, an organization could run a DLT that does two separate things for two separate sets of communities. For example, it could be
yes,
shipping, logistics, and finance, right? And so if you're from the outside, well, I want to talk to Rama, but like, which one is he on? Like, which transaction do I want to do today with Rama? Which sub DLT?
Right. If you think about the view addresses that we're trying to also draft spec out, there we're trying to actually allow an external party to identify a one of the internal ledgers. So maybe we should discuss more whether
Yeah,
or not
yeah.
it ought to be. I can
Great,
see the
great.
case for both, but yeah.
Yeah, great. This is exactly the kind of discussion we will need to have, because the use cases, cuts across. And you're right. I mean, if all these sub DLTs, the sub networks are hidden, then when you ask for a views report, you have to say which one, right?
Yeah.
Or worse, you don't know which one, so you just ask the gateway.
Yeah.
Right. These are the challenges. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good. We can talk about it in a few minutes, Rama. Thank you.
Sure.
Wes, you have your hands up.
Yes. Thanks, Wes. You're next. Okay. So some of this doesn't become sort of transport dependent, because as the protocol gets solidified, there hasn't been much discussion yet, at least that I've seen, on what transport the protocol will be used over. I mean, we also haven't talked about the structuring of it. TLS, for example, has been hinted at in the past, and many protocols already have built-in mechanisms for doing this sort of thing, where you are connecting to the remote machine. If you're using TLS, that means certificates are likely involved, and there's already a ALA I always forget that acronym. Paul will correct me in a minute. That allows you to say, this is the entity that I want to talk to, and that's used specifically for cases like this. So why? I guess my question is twofold, right? Is the requirements that fall out for doing this inside of the SAT protocol that cannot be solved by one of these other things? Note that the other, in the case of TLS, it actually requires a DNS-looking name. Interestingly enough, it doesn't have to actually be in the DNS, but it's the same. That's sort of the architecture for that protocol. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Could you hold that question until like 2 slides later? That's so that I have a diagram, and I think
absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Wes. So next slide is a set of. This is now still the architecture draft discussion, and Yaron has been terrific in San Francisco. He was busy, while talking to me, busy setting up the GitHub repo and moving all the stuff to this new GitHub repo. Next slide. I don't know if you could, slide 3, which is a set of questions. So if you go through the list of issues there, most of it, maybe except for 2 or 3, are text clarifications, right? So for example, a good one is that we talk about in the architecture document about device attestations, but in passing, but we never kind of say if this is mandatory or not. So I need to fix that. So no, it's not mandatory to implement, but it's an option down the road if gateway operators want to do that. I want to bring everybody's attention to 2 in particular, number 7 and number 10. So in number 7, the question was, are gateways trusted by definition, right? And I think the answer is yes. I think that's an assumption that, like, if you're participating in a network, then the assumption is you trust the gateways. And so the word trust needs to be qualified, of course, but in real life deployments, gateways and gateway operators will have some kind of a SLA, service level agreement, essentially a contract that shows liabilities and so on, and that's how you get sort of business trust. Go ahead, Yaron.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yaron, are you on mute?
You need to click the little microphone in sort of the upper left portion. You should, underneath your name on the upper left. Well, while we are waiting for Aaron, I haven't read issue 7 recently, but there's elements of trust, right? That is almost a little bit too generic, because there's many parties in these conversations. In other words, you mean the gateways are trusted between the gateways by other gateways, right? Not by clients of the gateway.
That's a good one. Yes, gateways to gateways, but if it's a private network, which is a closed network, which is one of the core assumptions why we need gateways, then sort of implicitly maybe it's by implicitly, well, if you're willing to have your asset in that network, that means you trust some of the entities and roles in that network. I don't know if that helps.
It does. Thanks. Yaron, you want to try speaking again? If you're not able to, you could always put it in the chat as well, and we can read it out. While we're waiting for him to figure out how he turns on his microphone, Rama, you want to go?
Your question is, I think, your question is right, that we have to figure out tease out exactly what aspect of trust we are dealing with here, and can for SATP, for the purpose of secure asset transfer, I think the question that we have to ask is whether G1 trusts G2 to be an honest spokesperson for the network behind G2 and vice versa. So that is primarily the question I think we have to deal with here, because if G2 and G1 are just acting of their own volition and they're not being honest transmitters of the network's instructions or the network state, then we're going to have a problem. I mean, G1 and G2 can still conclude an SCTP instance as per our spec, but that won't necessarily fulfill the whatever state changes are needed in the network. So I think something we did in our system a few years ago was uh, we tried to figure out what are the aspects of trust that gateway absolutely needs to be invested with, and which parts network can actually handle and overcome malicious gateway. And if you take the CIA model, the confidentiality, integrity, availability model of security, uh, we came to the conclusion that it's possible for a network to ensure that malicious gateway cannot interfere with or cannot hamper confidentiality and integrity, but whereas the gateway needs to be trusted for availability purposes, that is just that the gateway can mount a denial of service attack on the networks. So those are some of the thoughts I had on what aspects of trust a gateway needs to be invested.
Cool. That's awesome, Rama. I might just steal that text.
Sure. I think we have a bit of the text in the architecture draft. Maybe not, or maybe no. It's in the. I think it's in the other draft.
Maybe the older version. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the other text to look for, right, is early on when way back in the BOFs, portions of this working group, there was discussions about what sort of relationship existed between gateways, and is there a legal agreement or something to fall back on, right? That was the foundation of the trust that we talked about in the past. Now, it's an interesting case where you don't have a legal agreement, and then you're still expecting the other party to behave appropriately. There's only so much that technology can help us solve that problem.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's right. Thank you, Wes. Okay. The other thing that I thought stood out from Yaron's set of comments is number 10, which is essentially a question, but like, if we were to take the primary backup strategy as the backup strategy, does that mean that for a network that has n gateways, 10 gateways, there's actually another 10 that's just shadow, that's passively sitting around doing nothing, literally? Or do we mean, well, out of those 10, each gateway will have to nominate another gateway amongst the remaining 9, regardless of how busy those remaining 9 are in terms of handling transactions. So that's a Yaron, thank you for that. I thought it was a good question. Since Raphael is online, Raphael, what are your thoughts about this question, issue number 10? Okay, maybe he's muted. Okay. I would probably suggest to take number 10 to the mailing list, because this is an actual real one. This is a good one. I mean,
well, of course, everything can be done on the mailing list, so that's always a good thing. The trick is you have to lean in to start the discussion, and hopefully people will answer. Again, this to some extent also comes back to some notion of what transports you're going to pick, because if you're picking a transport that allows load balancing and things like that, there's also two aspects, right? There's the external versus internal aspect of how many gateways you have. From an external aspect, it has to be, some mechanism to reach the other one over a protocol like TLS would require a DNS name or something like that points to an IP address, and then there may or may not be a load balancers, and it's all sort of ambivalent to the remote party, unless there are two records associated with a particular entry. What not everybody realizes is that www.example.com can have two IP addresses, and you're supposed to randomly pick which one you use when you get more than one record back like that. It's sort of designed that way, and some entities, in fact, if you look up www.google.com, I believe you get multiple addresses back, and the client's just supposed to pick one. But then you're also talking about voting mechanisms on the inside of the gateway, and how do we determine which one is sort of the primary and the rest are all backups? So I would make sure you split that discussion into two, and to some extent, there's almost two separate issues there.
Okay. No, good point. Good point. Thanks, Fez. Because I think this is a mailing list thing. So let me take the initiative and post the question to the mailing list. Okay. Yaron, out of the list of issues there, any more that we should discuss now? Like,
yeah, I apologize for my audio problems. I'm not sure how much of my rant you actually heard. So I was going on about the need for a legal considerations subsection, and tying that to both number 7 and the ownership question. And then there was actually one other issue, the issue about stage 0, where I was saying this is stage 0 is important enough for interoperability that it needs to be standardized like other components, needs to be covered to the same level of depth and standardized to the same degree as the rest of the protocol. And I think you, Thomas, had a good response to that one.
I agree. We're to be honest, we're slowly creeping through some of the issues in stage 0, right? Like this whole network identifier thing is part of stage 0, because if you don't know what network your asset's on, you can't even find it. And so, that's good. Thank you, Ryan. So right now, correct me where it's out of scope, but I know, for example, Dennis is working on the context ID setup between applications, and that's a stage 0 thing. Asset verification, is also a stage 0 thing, and the views draft that Rama is working on is also relevant there, because you might want to query a network to find out some, does the asset actually exist? Is it in, does this person actually own it? Does Alice actually own it? And it's not a transaction, it's more like a query. And that's part of, I would say, a setup of stage 0 as well. So yeah, I personally agree with you, Yaron. We have, as I said, we have 3 broccolis on our plate that the chairs are asking us to finish the broccolis before we can eat the carrots and the ice cream.
Good way to put it. So speaking, with my chair hat on, I think what I wrote to somebody, the other day is the way to think about it is the working group is tasked with getting the basic protocol up and working. There are a lot of other ice cream and related bits that we would like to solve at some point. If there is something, so stage 0 is being used generically to speak to a lot of different elements of setup or trust or whatever. If some of those are required in order to even get the protocol up and running, right? You can't do it without establishing who the remote entity is and whether you trust them or not. Although trust is probably a bad example because I think we're outsourcing trust to a large extent. But so if there's some element of setup that is required for the protocol to work, that's no longer out of scope, right? Now, and Paul is here and could actually speak up and yell at me too, but in order to develop a functional system. So the original charter lists the starting documents that we are allowed to sort of create. Whether some elements of stage 0 need to be put into the architecture of the protocol document or even be a separate draft if they really need to be separate, that's all fine if, we need to add a 4th piece of broccoli in order to make it so that the protocol can actually function in the first pass out the door. That's fine.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Wes. So I think the onus is on the group to figure out, well, what needs to go into this 4th broccoli on the plate. Okay. Anything else before I switch gears and talk about the identifier proposal? Okay.
That is a good question. So to reframe that, is there anybody that wants to discuss other aspects of the SATP work or the other active drafts before we shift into essentially any other business and dessert? Okay, so I guess the resolution for these 2, Thomas, is you're going to take them to the mailing list and spell them out so that people can talk about them, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct. Yep, thanks.
Sounds good. Then go ahead and fire into
okay.
Out of scope discussions.
Yeah, so this is out of scope. So next slide. So we've had discussions about asset network, DLT identification schemes for the last 2 years, and you've heard me complain probably like, why is it that you've got these almost $1 billion industry and no one's figured out like how to standardize this? And lo and behold, of course, the Ethereum Enterprise Foundation has indeed worked on this, and that's why we had Wajia come and present to us, I think earlier this year. What was it, last year? This year, I guess. And so the question is, many of these DLT networks already have their own numbering scheme and identification scheme. So taking Ethereum as an example, they already have this. They call it chain ID. The problem is many of these networks, when deciding on identifier schemes, they don't think globally, and they don't think about interoperability, and they don't think about namespaces. Okay, so this is kind of interesting. I won't comment on this any further. Don't want to offend anyone, but let's say we had to work on a an identification scheme that works globally. What things would we need to satisfy, and this is what this slide is trying to show. So it has to be backward compatible in the sense that, well, it has to be able to be, we can't ask the existing networks to change their identifier. The immediate answer would be go away. Number two, it needs to support this problem of, well, maybe there are multiple sub networks, right? So for example, some DLTs have experienced forks. Internally, a transaction might be able to be routed to the correct fork, assuming there's two forks. But from the outside, if you're doing a cross network transfer, you might end up with the wrong fork, the wrong branch of the fork. So that's one use case. Then there's the issue that given this decentralization sort of spirit, let's say, there might be cases where somebody somewhere on a different part of the planet decides to create a new network and they just pick a number, and so how do we provide some kind of a guidance that reduces the chances of collision in terms of the namespace, right? And this is assuming that we don't have an organization like ARIN to do this, or if you guys are aware of the DOI, Bob Kahn in the handle system. Assuming such things don't exist in this asset space, well, how could you provide guidance in a document that reduces this chance of collision, but not to zero, because there's always a chance of collision. And I think I mentioned forks. Next slide. Actually, could you move 2 slides forward to the diagram, Wes? I placed it in the wrong sequence.
Yeah, I had a comment actually at 1.2, but that's fine. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is kind of the example that I was trying to explain, that we, the IETF and SATP, we have no control over what a network will do internally, because unlike the internet, and so on, where there's too many networks, too many designs, and so on. However, for gateways, there's an opportunity for us to say, well, if you want to implement the SATP gateways, then your gateways need to understand this 32-byte scheme that we are proposing, and how the gateway connects internally to its network. That's out of scope for us. Gateway, you figure out. I mean, but we've always said that facing inwards, the gateway needs to understand how to work with its own network. That's always a given. What's in scope for us is between G1 and G2. And so this is what this diagram is trying to portray, is this thing. Wes, go ahead. You got a question?
I do. Thanks, Wes. So it's an interesting problem space in multiple folds, right? And so to come back to this even comes back into scoping. So I'd say some of this is out of scope and some of this is in scope, which you said all of it was out of scope. So I'm actually giving you a little bit of broccoli here. What networks call themselves internally is different than what the networks call themselves externally. And again, it to some extent will fall back to the transport case of, if I'm going to connect to this remote entity and I'm believing I'm connecting to network with some identifier, there's the aspect of making that connection and getting to that endpoint that may be a globally unique namespace within the DNS or something, because you have to figure out how to make that connection, or you have to pull an IP address from something else in order to make that connection.
Yeah.
And so the interesting thing is, in a distributed environment, you're actually running into the quintessential case of why distributed environments are hard, right? Because you need a global unique namespace, and yet in a decentralized way.
Yeah. So I think that from the beginning we kind of assumed that the gateway has an IP address in the usual sense of the word, and so you can always connect it, and you can think of a gateway as kind of a server in the traditional model. So there is an IP address and so on. It's v4, v6. It's reachable, and because we've been talking about a REST API, then there's also a defined endpoint, the REST endpoint that you want to reach, and a gateway implementing SATP. Well, SATP will have multiple. Just in the SAT core, I think we've got several. The bigger question actually is this identifier is an application layer identifier, right? And so once you connect to a gateway, then you say, well, like, okay, are you serving this 32-byte, organization? Oh, here, wait, yeah, you had your hands up. Go ahead.
Yeah. Maybe I give some. Well, thank you for all the questions. I think also thank you, Thomas, for the answers. I just want to describe a little bit background and compare this with TCP/IP. Okay. First, this identifier is for blockchain, for ledger, and also for subledger, as Thomas mentioned. So this is a new thing, because with TCP/IP you have MAC address, you have IP address, you have URI, your DNS, you have domain name, different things, right? But none of these address the issue of blockchain. Blockchain is another entity that need to have an identifier. And in the past, there was no chain identifier at all. When you have Bitcoin, nobody had a chain identifier because there's only Bitcoin blockchain, nothing else, right? There's no need for identifier. And then Ethereum came around, and then Ethereum had the 2016 DAO hack, and it's split into ETC and ETH. And at that time, there's a double signing a spent attack, because you can sign the same transaction and send it to ETH or send it to ETC. They're exactly the same. So the same spending can be spent on both chains. And then they realize, hey, there's a need to identify these two blockchains. So at that time, there was EIP 155 proposed by Vitalik. Basically, what he was saying is that I have Ethereum chain ID equal to 1, and then my testnet is equal to 3, and then another testnet equal to 5, and then the rest you figure out yourself. So when you have a new blockchain, you just need to tell people an integer number that you take as the chain ID for that blockchain. And that chain ID is sent to a GitHub address to avoid collision. That is okay for a couple of years, but now we have more and more blockchain coming in, both for public blockchain and private blockchain. So there's a need for this identifier to identify different blockchains, so that you know which transaction you want to send to, where you want to send the transaction to, and then how do you identify the chains. So there have been different proposals, and I think we discussed that before. And this proposal has some differences. Okay, first, we make it self-verifiable. Because we are in decentralized environment, there's no way that you are going to rely on a centralized registration to identify every node in the system. So for some reason, this chain ID should be self-verifiable, network ID should be self-verifiable. It means that even a machine run 2 blockchains, because potentially a machine can run 2 blockchains, a server can run 2 blockchains, and even a server can run a real blockchain and a fake blockchain, right? And this chain ID or network ID should be able to identify which network or ledger this server is running on. So it should be self-verifiable. And it should also, I think this is from Thomas, address the subnet case, which is, when in my proposal, I did not mention about subnet. And I think this is from Thomas, saying that, yes, there are cases where we have chains on chain, right? One blockchain, one ledger can have sub-ledgers. And this has like 6 bytes for that. And also it need to have a backward compatibility. And then from there you can build metadata on top of this unique ID. So that could be a separate layer, which is at the application layer. You can write smart contracts to look up the other metadata for this subnet for this network ID. So that is the purpose of this network ID. And I think it's very important, because I was saying this is when we were thinking about interoperability, this is one of the first things we think about. You've got to be able to identify each ledger, each blockchain in a unique way and make it self-verifiable. And also there are cases where you fork one blockchain into two forks and both believe they are legitimate. How can we verify which one is legit, which one is forked? So there should be mechanism for that as well. So that's the background of this proposal. I just, if there are more specifications, I can help answer those questions.
Wes, you had a question?
I do, yes. First, with my chair hat on, I will remind everybody that the SAT protocol is not blockchain specific. We are chartered to be agnostic, where we have different types of systems that we can transfer digital assets between. And so it may be that on the left-hand side of this diagram is a blockchain, and on the right-hand side of the diagram is a traditional banking network or something like that. And we've always considered those in scope. So do please be aware that anything that is a technology that is specific to a type of storage mechanism, such as a blockchain-based network, cannot necessarily be used globally. And so the real question is, I have to break this problem into two parts that you have. One is, how do you identify the ability to get to the other gateway? And then the second part of that is, how do you identify the component within that system, which may be a blockchain on one side, it may be a completely different blockchain with a completely different way of talking to its subnets. It may be a traditional bank. I can imagine something in between, where a bank has branches and the assets are actually kept independently, not in a global, system within an integrated bank, but rather I need to talk to this bank, to this branch, to this account in that branch. So to me, there's two parts of this identifier problem. There is the, how do I get to, where I need to talk to? And the second part is, given that, what is so that has to be sort of globally understood, whereas the internal part can be, independent. And so I think that's sort of like what DIDs are probably one of the things that should be looked at for doing this, because DIDs already have a sort of global part and an internal part that can be, separated. The forking problem is a nasty one. That's true on the business side too, where even a bank can split in two, and half the customers go one way and half the customers go another. And how do you reestablish the connection protocol in that case? That's an excellent point.
Thank you. No, the DID suggestion is a good one. Yeah, thanks. Go ahead, Wejia.
Well, thank you, Wes. I think actually the scope we propose is even bigger than what I thought, the original thought. I thought ledger is big enough, or chain is big enough already. If you want to make it globally kind of applicable, I think the GUID, some of them propose some of the GUID mechanisms, so that it's a unique identifier, and then you interpret the meaning of that GUID. I think for blockchain, with that in mind, it's possible that we can kind of modify this a little bit, because for this proposal, we have the first 16th as the hash of the Genesis block for blockchain, and that uniquely identify a blockchain, just for 16 bytes. And technically, you can make that 16 byte to be less, maybe 8 byte enough, and then you can use the other bytes to identify different systems that can be assigned by the entity themselves. Just describe that you can assign these in the way that you want. But we define a subset for the chain itself. If it's a chain, you need to put the Genesis block hash information into here so that it can be identified.
Thanks.
So it would be the job of the gateway to essentially do mapping, right? So if gateway G2 was in front of a banking network, that's 16 bytes. It's up to G2 how to map that 16 bytes to whatever identifier the banking system is using behind it.
Yes, I think that's a kind of improvement already, because some of the banking system may not have a ledger that have Genesis block, and they can define it. So we need to, there's a hard requirement right now saying the first 16 byte is the Genesis block hash, but we need to lose that kind of a constraint. It just that can make it customizable.
Okay, I mean, yeah, no, it's good 60 bytes because I've seen other, like in the VASP, in the exchange sort of discussion a couple of years ago, there was a Swiss proposal where all the entities get like 256 bits, and they had all sorts of mappings internally. But my point is that, yeah, somebody has to do this mapping, and I think it's going to be the gateways. But you're right. It's I mean, we have to find out, is 16 enough, 16 bytes enough, for some identifiers. Like maybe the first place to look is the ISO 220 document to see the size of the identifiers that they use for the members of a messaging network in ISO.
From a security perspective, 16 bytes is rarely ever enough, but we should let Yaron speak while he's...
Yeah, go ahead. Yaron, go ahead. Sorry.
So, first of all, I think we shouldn't be discussing byte sizes at all. I don't think we're limited in the size, and we can actually adopt a variable length solution here. I think we're, with respect, wasting our time debating 16 versus 32. And then someone mentioned the CAIP2 on the list. That's a chain agnostic proposal for solving this thing. I'm not married to that one, but I do like that they have a namespace part, which is a short string, just like an HTTP method. And then you can have basically anything on the local part. So it's a two-part identifier, and you can, for example, have to follow on Wes's example of bank accounts, you can have an IBAN namespace, and then you get all the IBAN identifiers for banks and bank accounts for free. So you grant, there's an owner to each namespace, and it's their job how they do it. And of course, one of them could be this EIP, so a decentralized solution for Ethereum or Ethereum-like networks.
No, that's a great idea. No, thank you. That's a good idea. This is, folks. This is exactly the kind of input I think that Weijia and myself are looking for, because I think everyone agrees there needs to be some solution, and I think it's a good thing that the IETF is at least talking about it, and maybe we can make it like a real proposal. Rama, go ahead.
That's my question. So identifying a network, the technical problem we are trying to solve there really is how to identify a gateway that speaks for a network, right? Ultimately, that's what we want to find out.
Say again. How do
we locate a gateway that represents a network, right? That's ultimately
yes,
what.
That's one of the questions that Wes was saying. That I know Bob is in that network over there. I just know the colloquial name of that network, but I don't know the actual how to get it. What do I type into my application, and how does my gateway find one of the gateways in this remote network? Yeah, that's one of the challenges. Weijia?
Yeah, I have a comment about this this URL based, URI based versus this byte based, because I was one of the first guys who looked at this problem actually before it became a problem, and I look at different schemes, and you can have a URI based, but that should be at the second layer, not at the kind of embedded layer, because This identifier is almost like a MAC address, right? It just specifies certain bytes to identify the chain, and then you can have different schemes like URI and other ways to describe it. But once you have URI, you cannot ask the machine to verify by itself, because you need it to be self-verifiable. Right? And that's why you need to have something that's with a fixed length, because you also have detailed issue like signing a transaction. This ID need to be signed into transaction, and that's why the size. I'm talking about 32 byte. I'm talking about, but the first 16 could be the Genesis block hash. So I think 32 byte is a reasonable length. If it's too big, then the signed signature become too big, and when you go to blockchain, it's going to cause a lot of gas. And they have been studied on this already, on how big that thing should be. And the uint 256 bit is a good length for it. But I just want to say that there are different proposals already. But this is the one that addressed the issue of self-verification and also anti-fork. The others, other specs rely on some registration, and this one does not. So I just want to point out the differences.
Can I go? Hello?
Did we lose Thomas? I think we may have lost Thomas. Or Thomas, you're no longer speaking. So I think.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello? Oh, okay. I got the lost connection. Go ahead. Was there a question for me?
I think so. Weijia, you were done, right? And I think Rama is next.
Yeah, I got a quick question for Vijaya. Can we precisely define what self-verifiability means in this context, in the SATP context? In that
Can you say I lost a little bit the question?
Can we precisely define, like in a technical way, what self-verifiability means here, so we can then map the responsibilities?
Yeah, I can definitely describe that because decentralized blockchain is a different thing, right? In TCP/IP, you can identify every server, and you can say this server is trusted or not, right? But decentralized blockchain to some extent is a non-trusted environment. It's because you can have a server, but you can run a fake blockchain and the real blockchain at the same time, right? And this hour you can run the real blockchain, next hour you can run a fake blockchain, and this is normal. This is normal, right? And self-verifiable means that once I get the transaction, cross-chain transaction, interoperable transaction, I should be able to kind of clarify or verify whether this transaction is run by this node as a real blockchain, right blockchain, or a fake blockchain. Because I know the Genesis block, because I encode the Genesis block hash into my ID here. If the Genesis block of your blockchain does not match, I know you're running the fake one, because hackers can easily run two blockchains at the same time, one real, one fake, right, to hack. And self-verifiable means that once I get the chain ID, I can verify this chain ID independent of any third-party registration service. And today, none of the chain ID definition or network ID definition has this capability.
Okay, thanks, Weijia. Wes?
Thanks. I mean, this is a problem that I actually meant to allude to earlier, but there's been huge issues in the internet at large with the security of knowing that you're trying to talk to some entity and actually getting to a different one, and them purporting to be, the real identity that Weijia was just pointing at. it's a nasty one, and we need some sort of, typically one of the things that happens that we'll have to look into is protocol binding to ensure that this happens. So you get to a trusted source. TLS itself has been plagued with this because there are so many certificate authorities that are, anchored as roots of stuff. You could believe you're talking to, google.com, and you're actually not, because you hit a security certificate that was issued by something else fraudulently. And the for those that are not familiar with it, the Certificate Transparency Project within the IETF actually is sort of the global ledger, and actually is using a blockchain like ledger, Merkle tree specifically, but to record who is issuing what in order to ensure uniqueness occurs across all of these identifiers and stuff. So that's going to come back to bite everybody at some point. It's like, how do you, when you're bootstrapping this protocol, being able to bind the fact that you're making this network connection to talk to something, and how do you bind that with the internal notion of them being able to prove that you're actually in the right place. No, I'll note that we only have 4 minutes left. So,
thanks, David.
I agree with Wes. It's a very important problem, but I mean, I think we actually discussed this months ago, that that this protocol is, has to make some assumptions, has to make some assertions that, okay, it's just describing the transfer of this. We don't know if the object that's being transferred is actually valid, at either place. We can't verify, as you said, the gateways. We can't verify this. It's saying, we're asserting that all of these other connections are correct, and that, the object that's claimed to be transferred really exists, that as you said, that this network is valid, we're connecting to the appropriate gateways, the appropriate clients. It's a very important issue, but I'm not certain that is that really germane, or I don't know how we, it's really in our wicket to try to solve it.
Yeah, very good point, David. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, one important thing to note is a past security area director 20 years ago was riding in a taxi, around to go to dinner with him and a few other people. And his point to me was very valid. He said, you can do anything you want, just document it, right? If you're going to make assumptions on, what is acceptable and what is not, as long as you document it well in the security considerations section, essentially you can do anything you want. And it's important that when these issues come up, we very much outline what are the assumptions, what are the basis of trust that the protocol isn't handling. And then you're absolutely right, that can be completely out of scope. Now, whether people want to use it as a trustable system is where you have to very carefully find that line of what needs to be included and what can be a basis. And going back to the very beginning discussion of the day, does gateway G1 trust gateway G2, and is there a legal relationship or something else that's outside of scope, or are we making an anonymous connection that is unknown? So Thomas, it's probably time to think about wrapping up, because we're actually
I think that's the last slide. The previous slide to this is just the table that people can look up in the draft. Yeah, it's just, and this is probably going to change. But I was thinking, if this is, we had the architecture subgroup discussions in the past, side meeting. If I don't know if people are, those who are interested, we could have another follow-up call, in a couple of weeks, just on this topic, because there's this question of DIDs we discussed in the past. How does that fit? There's the question of the banking identifiers. I have a question. Is 32 bytes enough? Right? So maybe we need more. I don't know. More is good. I don't know. But yeah, if I'll send out an email to the mailing list proposing a date, if that's okay, and if people want to continue discussing just this particular identifier question, we could have that subgroup.
I think that's fair. And there's definitely been some support in this meeting today for more flexible identification systems as well, that are more arbitrary in length or things like that, because we have the space. David, you get the final word.
Remember the lesson of IPv4.
That's great.
Thank you, David.
Weijia?
Well, I just say that's great for the IPv4 reminder. Well, thank you.
Okay, so that's the end of my slides, Wes.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. That brings us right to time, which is good. Actually, I do have another meeting that I need to go jump to. But thank you all for coming. I think this was a great discussion. And Thomas, I look to you especially to kick off discussions around issues 7 and 10 on the mailing list. I describe them fairly well so people can jump in and have a good conversation about them. Sound good?
Sounds good. Thank you, Wes. Thank you, folks.
All right. Thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Wow.